And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service in Alaska region, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Friday, January 10th, 2025. And starting with the sea ice. The sea ice is extensive along the Beaufort Sea coast through the Chukchi Sea and Bering Straits. There are a few areas along the shoreline, some openings there, Cape Lisburne to just northwest of Point Hope. And down there toward Port Clarence and on the south side of St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, we do find some plenius here to the east of Emonic and Hooper Bay. More importantly, we have some brisk winds that are set up in the region, so this ice will drift at least a bit more westward as we have a very powerful low as we go through the latter half this weekend, especially later Saturday into Sunday. And I'll show all of that in a moment. But looking at what we got going late tonight into Saturday morning, the initial low pressure that has come on up and brought some wintry weather along areas of the southwest coast is sitting there west of Nunavik Island. And then we have this low that's going to just dissipate as it rides up into the western Gulf along the eastern Kenai Prince William Sound. This front will wash out into a trough. It's this low down here that'll be the main low that lifts northward Saturday. So by Saturday afternoon and early evening, this low will be crossing the eastern Aleutians up into the southeast Bering. This is a very powerful front. We have some very strong low-level and mid-level winds that are, quite frankly, of hurricane force that'll be riding northward. So what's going to happen is by Saturday night, as this front quickly moves northeastward, we're going to see some very strong winds develop across the Gulf and turning an arm winds into Anchorage hillside. Some of the wind gusts up there along the higher hillside, Chugach, could be 100 miles an hour with this system. By Sunday, that front is lifting north upward toward the Alaska Range. So also up along the Alaska Range will be high winds. The downslope Chinook winds with those southeast to south winds on the backside or north side of the Alaska Range. So that's what cause much milder temperatures. There could certainly be some record high temperatures this weekend into Monday over areas of south central, southeast, east central interior as this front just forces some very wet and warmer air northward. Now on the backside, we have the system consolidates into just a single strong low, which that's why there are winter storm warnings for areas of the Seward Peninsula. And as we go up the Yukon River, especially from Anvik up through Ruby, these areas could pick up 6 to 10 inches of snowfall Saturday on into early Monday morning. So it's quite a potent system. It shows up here in the marine forecast with the wind and waves. So for areas of the Panhandle, southeast to south winds, 20 knots, 30 knots up here through Lynn Canal, gust of 35 knots, Stevens Passage, waves 4 and 5 feet. As we get to the outer coast, look for south winds 20-25 knots south of Sitka. As we get further west, those south winds tend to go more easterly to 40-knot gales around Cape Suckling outside there of Yakutat Bay. And then on Sunday, we find southeast to south winds 20-25 knots for the inner channels with a gust of 35 knots, Stevens Passage up through Lynn Canal. Waves still generally running around 4 feet, 8 feet down toward Dixon Entrance outside of Metlakatla. But as we go along the outer coast, pretty much Sitka northwest, where we're going to have gale to storm force winds by the time you get over toward Cape Suckling, and waves building in excess of 20 to nearly 30 feet there off of Cape Suckling by Sunday. So very potent front lifting northward. For areas of the northwestern Gulf on Saturday, increasing southeasterly gales ahead of the front. And again, that's winds above the surface level coming into Turnagain Arm here. That's why potentially the higher terrain around east of Anchorage, hillside, back toward Alyeska, those areas that could have 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts as we go through Saturday night into early Sunday morning. And we have gale force winds 40-45 knots from the southeast, Prince William Sound. Outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, waves building 20 to 25 feet. Lower Cook Inlet, we're expecting southwest winds of 35 to 40 knots with 10-foot waves, but once you get out into the open waters of the Gulf northeast of Kodiak City, you're encountering 20-foot waves. And then Sunday, it ramps up even more. We have storm force winds of 55 knots here outside of Hinchinbrook entrance to Kayak Island, as well as within Prince William Sound. 15-foot waves within Prince William Sound, 20 to 25-foot waves there out along the northwestern Gulf off the eastern Kenai. Southerly to southeasterly 40-knot gales from Middle Cook Inlet down through Lower Cook Inlet. We're also going to have to watch the area around the Homer Spit because astronomical high tide is going to happen this weekend. We have the full moon on Monday, and so tides are going to be higher than normal just because of the astronomical impacts there of the full moon and these strong winds coming through. So keep an eye on things down there at Homer. And then for Saturday, southwest gales 40 to 45 knots around Kodiak Island. Shelikof Strait waves there building 13 feet, 27 feet there east of Kodiak Island. As we trail on down along the Alaska Peninsula, we're looking at southeast to south 35 knot gales off of Sand Point, False Pass. Waves upwards of 13 to 16 feet. Bristol Bay, southeast winds 30 knots and then easterly winds 30 knots north of Cold Bay with waves of 4 to 6 feet. For Sunday, as that energy lifts northward, we have 40 to 45 knots south to southwest gales all around Kodiak Island. Waves could be building upwards of 25 to near 30 feet off of Kodiak Island in the western Gulf. And as we trail on down the Alaska Peninsula, look for southwest to west 35 to 40 knot gales both sides, and waves running 18 to 20 feet on the North Pacific side and as much as 10 to 17 feet on the Bering side north of Cold Bay. For the Aleutians, winds will be southeast to 35 knots, at least around Dutch Harbor on Alaska, Nikolsky, shifting back to the northeast, and then northerly, but 25 to 20 knots there, Atka to Adak. And as we get further west, winds generally out of the north at 20-25 knots there west of Adak. And on Sunday, in the wake of the system, because there's going to be a powerful low sitting up there in the west side of the state, we have westerly winds 35 to 40 knots across the eastern Aleutians, falling back to 25 knots there, Atka to Adak, and then back down to 15 to 20 knots between Adak and Kiska, and then Shemya could have west-northwest winds to 30 knots. Now looking at the southwest coast on Saturday, we have 20-knot winds, southwesterly winds into Bristol Bay, south winds into Kuskokwim Bay at 20 knots. And then generally along the Yukon Delta, southeast winds 15 knots, but as strong as 25 knots out of Norton Sound, especially in this wider expanse. There's plenty of ice, tendency for ice to want to shift a bit westward. But as we get into Sunday, with this powerful low sitting in this region, ahead of it we got southeast winds 30 knots within Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay. On the north end, we have easterly winds to 30 knots out of Norton Sound, and then northeast to north winds coming down along the Yukon Delta coast. And then west-northwest gales of 35 to 40 knots from St. Matthew down through the Pribilof Islands. For areas of the western Seward Peninsula to the north side of St. Lawrence Island, easterly winds 25 knots turning northerly around Gamble at 35 knots. Otherwise, northeast to east winds of 25 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea. On Saturday in the far north Beaufort Sea coast, easterly winds 15 to 20 knots. On Sunday, those easterly winds will increase to 25 knots all the way from Kaktovik through Utqiagvik down through Wainwright before turning more northeasterly, and then northerly 30-knot winds through the Bering Strait to the north side of St. Lawrence Island on Sunday, with plenty of ice in place. But keep in mind, we have winter storm warnings, winter weather advisories in for these areas that will take in effect Saturday, continue through Sunday into Monday morning. So be safe there as we go through this weekend of active weather.